Hello, look, I'm on the screen too. I'm just trialing this. You're year 12, you're very grown up and mature. You will not laugh or use this against me. I'm literally just going to see if this new tech works. And it's quite nice to see a face. So, welcome back to remote learning. Still, I'm going to call it lesson 8, even though it's 9, because we are moving on to look at the second part of the article today. So, a quick recap. That we are looking at procedural knowledge, taking the theories, the ideas linked to social diversity, and looking at how they can inform an understanding of an article. So we've introduced our second article that we began to look at yesterday. And today we're going to look at securing and moving through that guided reading process so that we can be practicing the skills of labeling, tracking ideas and concepts, clarifying understanding, that we're going to unify at the end of this process under an analysis task about how social factors determine a person's use of language and how writers present their opinions. So we have begun that process. Okay, you've already looked at the beginning of this article yesterday, and because it's a guided reading, we can slow the process right down. Okay, so we've introduced that this is a Telegraph article. It's still an online article, but it's from the Telegraph, so that kind of online newspaper platform. A lot of newspapers have moved to an online platform to kind of secure a readership, to modernize, to utilize technology to their advantage. Simply put, a lot of people aren't buying papers because they get it online these days. Okay, so we looked at the headline, "Shut your face, I'm fed up being ridiculed for my regional accent in academia." And we looked at our stand first, which also included the byline, letting us know that this is the opinion of an incredible professional, the Dr. Katie Edwards. She's an academic. She's achieved her doctorate. She's got credibility from a professional point of view. Okay, and then we looked, though, that this very professional person, so this person with a doctorate, is choosing to use an anecdotal tone, a way into this issue around being judged based on your accent, how social decisions, social judgments are made, social judgments being made based on how you speak. And we saw that she was being anecdotal, so she was drawing upon a real experience. Now, the benefits of an anecdotal approach is that sense of authenticity. This really happened to her. This isn't her opinion based on what she's read or researched, but actually she has genuinely been affected by this issue, which can strengthen her position. She then also brings into it the credibility of her doctorate and her research. So the beginning of the article, though, so far is focused on that anecdotal perspective. Okay, and this is as far as we got yesterday. We revised that use of anecdote then as a peg. And that Dr. Edwards is talking about a time when she was actually, if you like, ridiculed, insulted by somebody mocking her at a point of introduction. She talks about a professional introduction, that the context demands professionalism, and somebody adopted a fake Yorkshire accent and ridiculed her. So this is where we're coming in today, guys. Okay, so I'm just going to read you through this article, the next stage of the article, and then we're going to look at these tasks together. After delivering her mockery of my accent, I hadn't actually used that phrase. She looked away and continued speaking to my male, non-northern colleague in a perfectly normal tone and her own accent. Okay, so we know that with social factors, we always look for the higher grades to go beyond the obvious. So although this is an article about accent and social status in terms of maybe class, there is a little hint in here about a gender distinction being made, that maybe the student is acknowledging or showing preference towards the male colleague who's also non-northern. Now, we know that there can be overlaps of factors that impact on how people use language and our perceptions of people. So if you remember when we were looking at the work of Labov did acknowledge that there was a female weighting in his study. In other words, a lot of the women that, or a lot of the people, that were working in these stores and being seen to adapt the way they spoke weren't just maybe doing it because of class, but also because they were female. So we do see this gender distinction coming into play. Okay, and that also reminds us of the new territory we're going to, which is gender being a factor that can impact on language. But I digress. So I'm embarrassed to admit, so there's that lovely anecdotal use of the pronoun I. I'm embarrassed to admit I shuffled away. I felt utterly bewildered. So the benefit, again, of an anecdotal opinion article is that you can draw upon an emotional feeling. You can acknowledge how something makes you feel, not only what it what is happening itself. So we've got this layer of kind of verb choices that reflect how she feels. I'm embarrassed to admit I shuffled. I felt utterly bewildered. So here is somebody who's embarrassed, feeling ashamed of what they did, but she shuffles away. So she loses that confidence. She loses that strength of self. She disappears and feeling utterly bewildered. So bewildered is that verb choice that reminds us that people can feel confused. Okay, so I'm embarrassed to admit I shuffled away. I felt utterly bewildered that the way I speak had elicited such a deeply offensive and disrespectful response from a complete stranger. Of course, I've come to expect some comments about my accent. Mexborough and Doncaster, like Ted Hughes, boom. It seems to be hilarious novelty for some, an attempt at creating a gimmick to get ahead in my career for others. Wearing my knickers on my head might prove more effective, and a signifier of my flawed education for yet more. Okay, so this article develops then from this incident to how it makes the person feel, but also how this particular incident connects to other experiences for our writer. Dr. Katie Edwards, right, this respected professional, has had more than one experience of this problem. Okay, and she uses that word earlier in the headline in the Stanford that this is a problem, that this happening to people is not right. So what I want you to do in a minute, guys, is just going to press pause, and it says here to track ideas to create a lexical set that shows the responses to her accent. Now, there's 9 that I want you to track. Now, the first 3 come from the headline, the Stanford, and previous paragraphs, okay? Number 4 picks up from the top paragraph here. So in the beginning, in that headline, she uses the verb ridiculed. Okay, now that's beginning to show responses to her accent, how people reacted when they heard her speak. She was ridiculed. Okay, then she goes into this abstract noun, prejudice. So people have treated her with prejudice, they have ridiculed her. Now, she then goes on to talk about the anecdotal story, and she uses this phrase without ... any other pleasantries. Now, the reason that's here, that can be part of this lexical set, this noun phrase, because we're talking about how people are treating her, okay, their responses to her based on how she speaks. And there's a suggestion that this person, the student, drops any pleasantries and just goes straight for the insult. Now, I have done some clues here to help you track those words, either using the beginning letter or the beginning part of the phrase, just to guide you through. And you're just going to press pause in a minute and complete as many of these. Now, once you've found the phrase, I'm encouraging you to look and label it. So, as I've got, ridiculed is a verb, prejudice an abstract noun. So take your time, look for the words, and then allow yourself to add the linguistic label. Okay, so we're just going to press pause now, and we'll do the answers together in a minute. Okay, lovely people. So number 4, from that very first line, after delivering her mockery of my dialect. Okay, so number 4 is mockery. Now, mockery there is a noun. Okay, brilliant. Number 5, the clue was with that adverbial leading into it. So deeply offensive. So some people react in a deeply offensive way. In other words, their treatment of Katie Edwards is offensive, incredibly rude. Okay, so deeply offensive. Now, offensive there is the adjective, deeply the adverbial. So these are 2 different types of modifiers. We could say this is a modifier, an adjectival phrase. Okay, that leads us into the next bit, disrespectful response. Okay, so response, there is the noun, disrespectful, the adjective. So we could talk about that. Number 6, disrespectful response as a noun phrase. Okay, she then expands to talk about other experiences. So number 7, what did you get for that one? The clue there, AHS. Brilliant. A hilarious novelty. Now, again, novelty is working as a noun. Hilarious is the adjective. So again, we've got a noun phrase. But again, it's this other response that some people find her funny. But we know there's a real fine line between laughing with people and laughing at them. And this is definitely being presented as that people were laughing at her. They saw her accent as a hilarious novelty. And again, novelty means something that isn't, that is novel. It's not seen as the norm, and it's a reason for them to laugh. Okay, now what's number 8? Is something to get ahead. Okay, so another response she's had from people towards her accent is they've seen it as a gimmick to get ahead. Now, this is quite interesting. Gimmick is a noun. Okay, it's introduced by the determinant a there, a gimmick. And gimmick means something that we use, again, linking back to this idea of a novelty, a device, something that we do to get ahead. So she says some people perceive that she uses her accent, that she's almost putting it on. It's a trademark gimmick that's somehow going to get her promoted. And then last but not least, and I like this phrase, this would be a phrase I would potentially steal and use as a journalist myself, that some people are interpreting, or their response to her accent is they see it as a signifier of flawed education. So education that is flawed. Now that's a really powerful kind of expanded noun phrase again. Okay, so this is an expanded noun phrase, a signify of something flawed. Now anything that's flawed is damaged, it's incomplete, it's less than perfect. So in other words, some people hear her speak and think that somehow her education is incomplete, that her education wasn't as good as it should be. Now, all of these 9 are part of a lexical set that kind of give us an overview of how people are responding to accents, and all of them are clearly negative. Okay, so Dr. Katie Edwards' experiences so far, we can sum it up looking at the 9, the unifying factor has been a really negative response. So people are demonstrating a social prejudice against her based on the way she speaks. And that clearly has embarrassed her at times, frustrated her, angered her, confused her, because she's asking herself, why? Okay, so into the next part of the article. But this was the most boldly discriminatory response I've encountered for years. It turns out that what's fine for Alan Titchmarsh just doesn't go for women in academia. We can't be taken seriously and have working class regional accents at the same time. I wasn't even aware that I had an accent until I started university and discovered that whenever I contributed to the discussions during seminars, my comments would be followed by a series of eerie echoes from the other students as they tried out my vowel sounds for themselves. Usually there'd be a bit of laughter involved, and I learnt pretty quickly that saying, "I really like your accent too," was a subtle way to get them to stop. Or at least it seemed more acceptable to the tutors than my initial "shut your face, you tit" response. Okay, so again, we're developing anecdotal elements of this opinion and bringing in some other features as well. So again, you're going to pause in a minute. The first thing is a language labeling activity. Which coordinating conjunction is used to create a change in emphasis in this first sentence? And how else does the writer emphasize the significance of this event through that sentence structure? So just going to label that single sentence paragraph. Okay, then it says which reference to another person is made. The inclusive pronoun is we is used in this section to refer to which group of people. So who do you think counts as a part of that we group? What tension exists for this group? And at what stage did the writer realize that they had an accent? How did they respond to the people that laughed at them? Okay, so there's 2 responses. She responds in 2 ways. One she calls more subtle than the other as a clue. So just pause then, find your answers, and then we'll go through them together. Okay, lovely people. So which coordinating conjunction? So there we've got it in a non-standard position at the beginning of this sentence, but okay, now we know we've seen this in journalism. It's taking a rule of speech and applying it to journalism for emphatic stress. It kind of creates a moment of emphasis. So what else, though, is the writer doing to emphasize the significance of the event? Yes, absolutely. So we've got a single sentence paragraph, okay, and we've got the use of superlatives. This was the most boldly discriminating response I've encountered for years. So actually the language there is equally strong. So this is a single sentence paragraph. Okay, it's actually still a simple sentence because we've only got the main verb phrase I've encountered there, but it's standalone. It's got the emphasis there that this was a significant event when this woman at the professional academic conference slighted her and mocked her accent. Okay, now which reference to another person's made? Now this tells us something about the Telegraph demographic and who they think they're writing for, because yep, it's Alan Titchmarsh. Now we can see that because it's signifiers of a name, capital A, capital T, but actually the reference to that person only works if you know who Alan Titchmarsh is. Now, I know who Alan Titchmarsh is because my university housemate had a strange crush on him for years. So I used to have to watch Alan Titchmarsh's programs because my housemate Karen, luckily she'll never see this, had a crush on him. But he is a famous TV personality, but part of his fame is derived from the fact that he has this lovely working class accent. Okay, it's part of his identity, it's part of how he's seen. So brilliant. Okay, so that's the reference to another person. Now, he's somebody who has pride in his accent and is positively seen because of it. It's a positive aspect of his identity. The problem for Dr. Katie Edwards, she's saying, is that's okay for Alan. People respect him, but not her.